There's something profoundly unsettling about waking up to a world that no longer resembles the one you knew the day before. Maybe it's a phone call in the middle of the night that shatters the silence and your sense of security in one devastating moment. Maybe it's a diagnosis that changes everything, words from a doctor that divide your life into before and after, into what was and what will never be the same again. Maybe it's a relationship that ends without warning, someone you built your life around suddenly gone, leaving you standing in the wreckage, wondering how you missed the signs. Maybe it's a job that disappears, a career that evaporates, years of work and identity stripped away in a single conversation. Maybe it's a dream that shatters, a plan that crumbles, a future you were certain of that simply ceases to exist. Whatever it is, you know the feeling, that stomach-dropping sensation when the ground beneath your feet suddenly gives way and you're left grasping for something, anything to hold on to, as everything you thought was solid turns out to be sand. We live in a world that prides itself on stability, on predictability, on control. We build our lives like fortresses, convinced that if we just plan carefully enough, work hard enough, save enough money, build enough relationships, prepare thoroughly enough, we can insulate ourselves from chaos. We create elaborate systems of security. We diversify our investments, we build our networks, we plan for contingencies, we do everything we can to protect ourselves from the unexpected, and then life happens. And we discover, often painfully, that change doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for a convenient time. It doesn't care about our plans or our preferences or our carefully constructed sense of order. It just arrives, sudden and overwhelming and completely indifferent to our readiness, and demands that we respond. But here's what's remarkable, what's almost miraculous when you stop to consider it. Thousands of years ago, long before our modern anxieties about stability and security, long before we had insurance policies and retirement plans and emergency funds, long before we had the illusion of control that modern life provides, there was a collection of wisdom being gathered, refined, and passed down through generations. This wasn't abstract philosophy debated in ivory towers. This wasn't theoretical speculation about the nature of reality. This wasn't disconnected religious platitudes that sound good, but don't actually work in real life. This was practical, battle-tested wisdom forged in the crucible of real life. Wisdom about how to navigate uncertainty when the future is unclear, how to make decisions when the path forward isn't obvious, how to build a life that can withstand the storms that inevitably come, how to keep your footing when everything around you is shifting and nothing feels stable anymore. That collection is the Book of Proverbs. And while it was written in a vastly different time and culture, in a world that would be almost unrecognizable to us now, its insights into human nature, decision-making, relationships, character, and the art of living well are stunningly relevant, because here's the truth that we often forget. Human nature hasn't changed. The fundamental challenges of being human, of navigating an uncertain world, of building a meaningful life in the face of inevitable loss and change, these haven't changed. The temptations we face haven't changed. The choices between wisdom and foolishness, between character and convenience, between what's right and what's easy, these are the same choices humans have always faced. And the principles that lead to flourishing, the practices that create resilience, the character qualities that enable us to withstand crisis, these haven't changed either. What we're going to explore together isn't a list of religious platitudes that sound nice but don't actually help when your world is falling apart. These aren't outdated pieces of advice that worked in ancient times but have no relevance to modern life. These are 50 profound lessons from Proverbs that have the power to anchor you when your world is spinning, to guide you when you can't see the path ahead, to steady you when everything you thought was secure suddenly isn't. These are truths that have sustained people through every imaginable crisis, every kind of loss, every form of upheaval that human beings can experience. These principles have carried people through plagues and famines, through wars and disasters, through personal tragedies and collective catastrophes. They've proven themselves across cultures, across centuries, across every kind of hardship imaginable. And they can do the same for you right now in whatever change you're navigating. Before we dive in, I want to take just a moment to connect with you because I believe that matters. I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment and let me know your city or country. Tell me where you are right now as you're listening to this. There's something powerful about realizing we're part of a global community, all seeking wisdom, all navigating our own challenges, all trying to live well in an uncertain world. Someone might be watching this from New York, while someone else is in Lagos. Someone might be in Tokyo, while someone else is in Sao Paulo. We're scattered across the globe, across time zones, across cultures and languages and contexts, but we're united in this fundamental human experience of seeking wisdom in the midst of change. And if this content resonates with you, if you're finding value in what we're exploring together, I want to sincerely ask you to subscribe to this channel. Not just as a number, not just to make the algorithm happy, but as someone who's genuinely part of this community. Your subscription tells me that this matters to you, that you want more of this kind of deep, practical wisdom in your life. It tells me that you value substance over superficiality, that you're willing to invest time in exploring ideas that actually matter. And honestly, it encourages me to keep creating this content, to keep digging into these ancient texts and finding the wisdom that speaks to our modern struggles. If you want to take it a step further, consider becoming a channel member. You'll get early access to videos before anyone else sees them, and you'll become an even more integral part of what we're building here. A space where ancient wisdom meets modern life, where we can grow together, where we can support each other in the journey of becoming wiser, more resilient, more fully human. This community spans continents, cultures, and backgrounds, but we're united in this pursuit of wisdom, in this commitment to living well, even when life is hard. I'm genuinely grateful you're here. Your presence matters, your engagement matters. You're not just consuming content. You're part of a conversation that's happening around the world, a conversation about what it means to live with wisdom and courage and hope in uncertain times. Now let's begin. Lesson 1. Your words have more power than you think. Proverbs tells us that the tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. This isn't poetic exaggeration. This is a fundamental truth about the nature of language and its impact on reality. In a moment when everything is changing, when chaos is swirling around you and you feel like you have no control over anything, the words you speak matter more than you might imagine. They have the capacity to build up or tear down, to bring hope or despair, to create calm or amplify panic, to strengthen or to weaken, to heal or to wound. When your world is turned upside down, when everything you thought was certain becomes uncertain, one of the most powerful things you can actually control is what comes out of your mouth. Choose words that give life, even when, especially when, everything feels like it's dying around you. This isn't about toxic positivity or pretending things are fine when they're clearly not. This isn't about denying reality or putting on a fake smile and claiming everything is wonderful when it's actually terrible. That kind of dishonesty helps no one and actually makes things worse because it prevents genuine processing and healing. But there's a crucial difference between acknowledging difficulty and rehearsing catastrophe. There's a difference between being honest about pain and speaking destruction into existence. You can speak truth about your situation without cursing your future. You can acknowledge how hard things are without declaring that they'll never get better. Here's what happens when you're not careful with your words in times of crisis. You begin to create a narrative that becomes self-fulfilling. You say, "I'll never recover from this" enough times, and you start to believe it. And when you believe it, you stop taking the actions that would lead to recovery. You say, "Everything always goes wrong for me," and you train your brain to look for evidence of that statement, filtering out anything that contradicts it. You say, "I can't handle this," and you reinforce a sense of helplessness that becomes increasingly real. Your words don't just describe your reality, they shape it. They influence your emotions, your decisions, your perspective, your resilience. This is why Proverbs places such emphasis on the power of speech. The ancient wisdom writers understood something that modern psychology is only now confirming. The stories we tell ourselves and others have profound impact on our lived experience. When you're in crisis, you're essentially narrating your way through it. And the narrative you choose matters enormously. You can narrate from a place of victimhood or from a place of agency. You can speak from fear or from faith. You can use your words to deepen the pit you're in or to build a ladder out of it. Think about the people in your life who've navigated hard seasons well. If you pay attention to how they speak, you'll notice something. They acknowledge difficulty, yes. They don't minimize pain. They're honest about struggle. But they also speak hope. They speak possibility. They speak strength. They say things like, "This is really hard, and I'm going to get through it." They say, "I don't know how this will resolve, but I trust that it will." They say, "Today was terrible, but tomorrow is a new day." Their words carry both realism and resilience, both honesty and hope. Contrast that with people who get stuck in crisis, who seem unable to move forward. Listen to their speech patterns. It's often dominated by absolutes. Always, never, everyone, no one. It's characterized by catastrophizing. "This is the worst thing that could happen. My life is over. Everything is ruined." Now it's marked by helplessness. "There's nothing I can do. It doesn't matter what I try. I have no control." These speech patterns aren't just describing their experience, they're creating it. So what does it look like practically to use your words wisely when everything is changing? It means being intentional. It means pausing before you speak, especially when emotions are high. It means asking yourself, will saying this help or hurt? Will these words create possibility or close it down? Will this speech build up or tear down myself, others, the situation? It means choosing carefully what you say to yourself in your own head, because that internal dialogue is some of the most powerful speech you engage in. It means being honest about difficulty while also speaking truth about your capacity, about possibility, about hope. It means saying things like, "This is one of the hardest things I've faced, and I have what it takes to navigate it. I don't have all the answers right now, and I'm capable of figuring this out. Today was devastating, and tomorrow I'll take one small step forward. I feel overwhelmed, and I'm not alone in this." Do you see how these statements hold tension? They don't deny the difficulty, but they also don't surrender to despair. They speak truth about the challenge, while also speaking truth about capacity and hope. Your words also affect others. When everything is chaotic, people are looking for cues about how to respond. If you're a leader in any capacity, a parent, a manager, a friend, a community member, your words carry weight. What you say influences how others interpret what's happening. If you speak panic, you spread panic. If you speak doom, you spread despair. But if you speak steady truth, if you acknowledge difficulty while also pointing toward hope and action, you become an anchor for others. Your words can literally calm the storm for the people around you. This doesn't mean you have to have it all together. It doesn't mean you can't be vulnerable about your own fear or struggle. In fact, honest vulnerability is often more helpful than false confidence. but there's a way to be vulnerable that still speaks life. You can say, I'm scared too, and we're going to face this together. You can say, I don't know what's going to happen, and I believe we'll find our way through. You can be honest about your own process, while still using words that strengthen rather than weaken. The inverse is also true. Careless words in crisis can do tremendous damage. A sharp word to someone you love in a moment of stress can create a wound that outlasts the crisis itself. A thoughtless comment can shatter someone's confidence when they most need it. A moment of verbal lashing out can damage a relationship in ways that take years to repair. This is why Proverbs warns so strongly about the tongue. It recognizes that words once spoken can't be taken back. The damage they do can be lasting. Guard your tongue especially carefully when you're tired, when you're stressed, when you're afraid, when you're angry. These are the moments when you're most likely to say things you'll regret, things that don't reflect who you really are or what you really mean, but things that can cause real harm nonetheless. Create space between feeling something and saying something. Learn to pause, learn to breathe, learn to count to 10 or step away or sleep on it before you speak in moments of high emotion. Remember, your words have power, more power than you think. They can curse or bless. They can destroy or create. They can wound or heal. They can spread fear or hope. They can reinforce limitations or open possibilities. When everything around you is changing and you feel powerless, recognize that you have tremendous power in this one area, the words you choose to speak. Use that power wisely. Use it for life, not death. Use it to build, not destroy. Use it to encourage, not discourage. Use it to create the future you want, not to cement the pain of the present. Lesson 2. Pride will make everything worse. When everything changes overnight, when your life is suddenly not what you expected or planned or built it to be, your ego takes a massive hit. And this is where pride becomes incredibly dangerous, because pride is fundamentally about protecting your ego, about maintaining your image, about refusing to admit vulnerability or need or limitation. Maybe you're someone who's used to being in control, who's built an identity around competence and capability and having it all together. Maybe you pride yourself on being independent, on not needing anyone, on being the strong one that others lean on. Maybe your sense of self-worth is wrapped up in your success, your achievements, your ability to manage life effectively. And now, suddenly, you're not in control. You don't have it all together. You do need help. You're not managing effectively. You're vulnerable and exposed, and you don't have all the answers. This is a moment of profound choice. You can respond with humility, acknowledging the reality of your situation and opening yourself to help, to learning, to change. Or you can respond with pride, refusing to admit need, pretending to have it more together than you do, resisting help, maintaining an image even as it exhausts you and prevents you from getting what you actually need. Proverbs has a consistent, unambiguous message about pride. It comes before destruction. Pride goes before a fall. The proud will be brought low. This isn't moralistic finger-wagging. This is observation about how reality works. Pride makes you rigid when you need to be flexible. It makes you defensive when you need to be teachable. It makes you isolated when you need community. It prevents you from adapting, from learning, from receiving help, from changing course when you need to. And in times of upheaval, when everything is already unstable, pride is the thing that turns instability into catastrophe. Think about what pride does practically when you're in crisis. Pride says, I should be able to handle this on my own. So you don't ask for help, even though you desperately need it. You don't reach out to people who could support you. You struggle in isolation, trying to maintain the appearance that you're fine, that you've got this, that you don't need anyone. And meanwhile, you're drowning. But you're drowning alone because pride won't let you admit you're in over your head. Pride says, I can't let people see me like this. So you hide. You put on a mask. You perform competence you don't feel. You pretend everything is under control when it's actually chaos. And this performance takes enormous energy, energy you desperately need for actually dealing with your situation. But pride demands the performance, so you exhaust yourself maintaining an image instead of addressing reality. Pride says, admitting I was wrong or made mistakes would be too humiliating. So you double down on bad decisions. You refuse to change course even when it's clearly not working. You defend positions you know are indefensible. You justify actions you know were wrong. Because admitting error feels like admitting weakness, and pride can't tolerate that. So you stay stuck in patterns that aren't serving you, making the same mistakes repeatedly, because changing would require admitting you were wrong. Pride says, I should already know what to do. So you don't seek counsel. You don't ask questions. You don't admit confusion or uncertainty. You make decisions based on incomplete information or flawed understanding, because asking for help would mean admitting you don't have all the answers. And those decisions, made from pride rather than wisdom, often make your situation worse. Pride says, my way is best, so you're unable to learn from others. You can't receive feedback. You can't consider that someone else might have insight you lack or see something you're missing. You dismiss advice, reject wisdom, ignore warning signs, all because accepting input from others would challenge your sense of having superior understanding. Do you see how destructive this is? Pride, in every one of these manifestations, prevents you from doing exactly what you most need to do in crisis. Seek help, admit limitations, be honest about your situation, ask questions, receive counsel, learn, adapt, change course. Pride keeps you locked into patterns that don't work, because changing them would require admitting they weren't working in the first place. The alternative is humility. And humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It isn't self-deprecation or false modesty or pretending you don't have strengths and gifts and capacity. Humility is seeing yourself accurately. It's having an honest assessment of both your strengths and your limitations. It's being able to say, I'm good at these things and I'm not good at these other things, without defensiveness. It's being able to say, I don't know, without shame. It's being able to say, I need help, without feeling like a failure. Humility is what allows you to receive. To receive help, to receive wisdom, to receive correction, to receive support. Pride closes you off to receiving, because receiving requires admitting need. Humility opens you to receiving because it acknowledges that need is part of being human, that we all have limitations, that independence is an illusion, and we all actually need each other. When everything is changing and you're in crisis, humility is what enables adaptation. The humble person can say, my original plan isn't working, so I need a new plan. The proud person is locked into their original plan even as it fails, because changing it would mean admitting it wasn't perfect to begin with. The humble person can say, I was wrong about this, and now I'm going to adjust based on new information. The proud person can't admit being wrong, so they stay locked into positions that reality has already proven false. Humility creates space for learning. When you don't have to pretend you already know everything, you're free to be curious, to ask questions, to explore, to learn from anyone and everyone. Some of the wisest people I know are also the most willing to learn from anyone. From children, from people they disagree with, from unexpected sources. They don't have to protect their image as the expert, so they're free to learn everywhere. Humility also creates deeper relationships. When you're willing to be vulnerable, when you don't have to maintain a perfect image, when you can be honest about struggle and fear and need, you create space for real connection. People can't connect with your image. They can only connect with your humanity. And your humanity includes all the messy, difficult, imperfect parts that pride wants to hide. When you let people see those parts, when you're honest about where you're actually at, you give them permission to be honest too. And real relationships, the kind that can sustain you through crisis, are built on that kind of honesty. Here's what's paradoxical about pride and humility. Pride is supposed to protect you, to keep you safe from judgment or rejection or shame. But it actually makes you more vulnerable because it isolates you and prevents you from getting help. Humility is supposed to make you vulnerable by exposing your limitations. But it actually makes you safer because it connects you to others and allows you to receive what you need. Pride says, I have to do this alone to protect myself. Humility says, I can't do this alone, and asking for help is strength, not weakness. In seasons of change, when everything is uncertain and difficult, pride will tell you that you should be handling this better, that you should have it more together, that needing help means you're failing. Don't believe it. That's a lie that will isolate you and make everything harder. The truth is that hard seasons are hard. That's not a failure on your part, that's just reality. And navigating hard things well usually requires help, requires community, requires being honest about struggle, requires learning and adapting and being willing to change course. Set aside your pride, not because you're weak, but because you're wise enough to know that strength includes knowing when to ask for help. You're courageous enough to be vulnerable. You're secure enough in who you are that you don't have to pretend to be something you're not. Let people in. Let them see the mess. Let them help. Let yourself learn. Let yourself change. Let yourself be human, with all the limitations and needs that being human includes. The people who navigate crisis best aren't the ones who pretend they have it all figured out. They're the ones who are honest about difficulty, quick to ask for help, willing to admit when they're wrong, open to learning, flexible in their approach. They're humble, and that humility, far from being weakness, is actually the source of their strength and resilience. Lesson 3. Who you listen to determines where you end up. In times of crisis, advice comes from everywhere, relentless and overwhelming. Family members have opinions about what you should do. Friends offer suggestions based on their own experience or what they've heard worked for someone else. Colleagues weigh in with perspectives shaped by their own biases and assumptions. Social media is an endless stream of voices telling you what to do, how to feel, what to think, what this means, where you went wrong, what you need to change. Everyone, it seems, has an opinion about your situation and how you should handle it. And in a moment when you're vulnerable, when you're uncertain, when you're desperate for clarity, all of these voices can be overwhelming and confusing. Proverbs reminds us again and again that the path of the wise is shaped by who they choose to listen to. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. The way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools suffers harm. The message is clear and consistent. Who you allow to influence your thinking, who you give authority to speak into your decisions, who you trust to guide you, this matters enormously. Not every voice deserves equal weight. Not everyone's counsel is equally valuable. Not every opinion merits consideration. This is hard to accept in our current cultural moment, where we're told that everyone's perspective is equally valid, that all opinions matter, that we should never judge or evaluate or discern between different sources of wisdom. But that's foolishness masquerading as tolerance. In reality, some people have wisdom and others don't. Some people's track record demonstrates good judgment and others doesn't. Some people have navigated similar challenges successfully and others have crashed and burned. And when you're in crisis, when the stakes are high, when your decisions have real consequences, you cannot afford to treat all counsel as equally valuable. So how do you discern who to listen to? First, look at outcomes. Has this person successfully navigated something similar to what you're facing? Have they demonstrated good judgment in their own life? Are they producing fruit you admire? Strong relationships, good character, resilience, wisdom? Or are they offering you advice from a position of chronic chaos, broken relationships, repeated failures, and unresolved issues? You wouldn't take financial advice from someone who's bankrupt. You wouldn't take relationship advice from someone whose relationships are all dysfunctional. You wouldn't take career guidance from someone who's never built anything sustainable. Apply the same logic across the board. Evaluate counsel based on outcomes. Second, consider their motivation. Why is this person offering advice? Are they genuinely seeking your good, or are they working out their own issues through your situation? Are they invested in your flourishing, or are they invested in being right, in being needed, in controlling the narrative? Some people give advice because they care about you. Others give advice because it makes them feel important, or because they need to project their own experiences onto you, or because they have an agenda that isn't actually about your welfare. Be discerning about motivation. Third, look for wisdom, not just experience. Experience without reflection doesn't produce wisdom. Someone can go through something similar to what you're facing and learn nothing from it. They can repeat the same patterns, make the same mistakes, never grow or change. Experience plus reflection, experience plus learning, experience plus growth that produces wisdom. Look for people who haven't just been through things, but who have processed what they've been through, who have extracted lessons, who have allowed difficulty to refine them rather than just damage them. Fourth, seek out multiple perspectives. Proverbs talks about the value of many advisors. This doesn't mean you should be swayed by every voice or try to please everyone. It means that wisdom often emerges from considering multiple viewpoints, from seeing your situation from different angles, from having your blind spots exposed by people who see what you don't. But, and this is crucial, multiple advisors doesn't mean random advisors. It means multiple wise advisors, multiple people whose judgment you trust, multiple sources of wisdom. Fifth, be wary of people who always tell you what you want to hear. Some voices will validate every feeling, support every decision, never challenge you, never push back. This feels good, especially when you're hurting. But it's not helpful. You need people who love you enough to tell you the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it challenges your perspective, even when it requires you to reconsider or change course. Yes, men and yes, women might make you feel supported in the moment, but they won't help you grow or make wise decisions. Sixth, run from people who speak in absolutes without knowing your full situation. Be suspicious of anyone who hears a brief summary of what you're going through and immediately has a definitive answer about exactly what you should do. Real wisdom recognizes complexity. Real wisdom asks questions, seeks to understand, considers multiple factors. Fools are certain, the wise are thoughtful. Seventh, pay attention to people who ask good questions rather than just giving answers. Sometimes the most valuable counsel comes not in the form of telling you what to do, but in helping you think more clearly about your situation. People who ask penetrating questions that help you see what you haven't seen, consider what you haven't considered, recognize patterns you've missed. These people are offering something more valuable than simple answers. They're helping you develop your own wisdom and judgment. Eighth, seek out people whose values align with yours. If character matters to you, seek counsel from people of character. If faith is important to you, seek counsel from people of faith. If family is a priority, seek counsel from people who prioritize family well. You want advice from people who are aiming at the same target you're aiming at, who define success in similar ways, who share your fundamental commitments. Otherwise, their advice, however well-intentioned, will be shaped by values that don't align with yours, and will lead you in directions you don't actually want to go. Ninth, recognize that some voices need to be excluded entirely. Not everyone gets to speak into your situation. People who have repeatedly demonstrated poor judgment don't get a vote. People who have proven themselves untrustworthy don't get access. People whose own lives are characterized by chaos and dysfunction don't get to advise you. This isn't about being mean or dismissive. It's about being wise. You're under no obligation to give everyone equal access to influence your decisions. 10th, trust your gut when something feels off. If counsel doesn't sit right with you, if advice is pushing you in a direction that violates your values or compromises your integrity or creates dis-ease in your spirit, pay attention to that. Wisdom often speaks through that inner voice that says, "This doesn't feel right." Don't override your own discernment just because someone else seems confident or because you don't want to offend them by not following their advice. The stakes here are enormous. The counsel you receive and act on will literally shape your trajectory. Good counsel can save you years of pain, can help you avoid catastrophic mistakes, can point you toward paths you wouldn't have seen on your own, can provide perspective when you're too close to your situation to see clearly. Bad counsel can send you in directions that create compounding problems, can reinforce destructive patterns, can give you false confidence in decisions that will blow up in your face, can isolate you from people who actually could help you. When everything is changing and you're desperately seeking clarity about what to do next, be ruthlessly selective about whose voices you allow to shape your thinking. Quality over quantity, wisdom over volume, track record over charisma, character over credentials. Create an inner circle of counsel. People you genuinely trust, whose judgment you respect, whose lives demonstrate the kind of outcomes you want. Give those voices weight, and learn to tune out the noise of everyone else's opinions. This also means you need to be intentional about seeking out counsel, not just passively receiving whatever comes your way. Identify the wisest people you know and ask for their time. Don't wait for them to offer. Most wise people are humble and won't assume you want their input. Reach out, schedule conversations, come prepared with specific questions. Be teachable and open. Create opportunities to benefit from their wisdom. And when you receive good counsel, act on it. One of the most frustrating things for wise people is giving thoughtful counsel to someone who then completely ignores it and does whatever they were going to do anyway. If you're going to seek counsel, be willing to actually let it inform your decisions. Otherwise, you're just wasting people's time and your own. Remember, who you listen to determines where you end up. The voices you allow to influence you will shape your thinking, your decisions, your actions, and ultimately your outcomes. Choose those voices wisely. Your future depends on it. Lesson 4. Your character is your true stability. We build our lives on things we think are stable. We invest years into a career, believing that our job provides security. We build financial reserves, convinced that money in the bank creates stability. We cultivate relationships, trusting that the people around us will always be there. We work on our health, assuming that our bodies will function reliably. We create routines and structures and systems, all designed to give us a sense of solid ground beneath our feet. And then something changes. The job disappears, the money runs out, the relationship ends, the health fails. And suddenly, all those things we thought were stable, all those foundations we built our lives on, turn out to be far more fragile than we realized. This is devastating. Not just because of the practical loss, but because it shakes our fundamental sense of what we can rely on. If the things we thought were secure aren't actually secure, what is? If everything can change overnight, what's the point of building anything at all? This existential vertigo, this sense that there's no solid ground anywhere, can be paralyzing. But Proverbs points to something different. It tells us that integrity, righteousness, faithfulness, wisdom, character, these qualities create true stability. The righteous person is as bold as a lion. The integrity of the upright guides them. The name of the righteous is used in blessings. Your character, Proverbs suggests, is the one foundation that cannot be shaken, the one asset that doesn't fluctuate with circumstances, the one thing that can't be taken from you, no matter what happens externally. Think about what this means. Your job can be eliminated, but your work ethic remains. Your relationship can end, but your capacity to love faithfully is still yours. Your money can disappear, but your generosity and wisdom about resources persist. Your health can fail, but your courage and resilience endure. Circumstances change, sometimes dramatically and suddenly. But who you are, your character, your values, your integrity, that remains constant unless you choose to abandon it. This is where true security lies, not in external circumstances, which are always somewhat beyond your control, but in internal qualities, which you can cultivate and which no one can take from you. When everything around you is changing, who you are remains. And when you've invested in becoming a person of character, when you've built your life on a foundation of integrity and wisdom and faithfulness, that foundation holds even when everything else is shaking. What does it mean practically to build your life on character rather than circumstances? It means making decisions based on what's right rather than what's convenient or profitable. It means keeping your word even when it's costly. It means treating people well even when they can't do anything for you. It means being honest even when lying would be easier. It means doing the right thing even when no one is watching. It means choosing integrity over image, substance over appearance, character over comfort. This is countercultural. Our world tells us to optimize for outcomes, make decisions based on what will get you ahead, what will increase your wealth or status or influence, what will make you successful by external measures. Character is treated as optional, nice if you can afford it, but certainly not the foundation of a life. But Proverbs insists on the opposite priority. Character is the foundation, and everything else is built on that. Why does character create stability? First, because it creates consistency. When you're a person of character, people know what to expect from you. You're reliable. You do what you say you'll do. You show up. You follow through. This consistency creates trust, and trust creates relationships, and relationships create a network of connection that can sustain you through anything. The person of character is never truly alone because they've built relationships based on something solid. Second, character creates resilience. When you know who you are, when you have a strong sense of your values and commitments, when you're grounded in integrity, you have internal resources to draw on when external resources fail. You don't need everything to be going well in order to maintain your sense of self. You don't need success or approval or comfort to know who you are. Your identity is rooted in character, not circumstances, so circumstances can change without destroying you. Third, character creates opportunities. People want to work with, invest in, partner with, help people they trust. Integrity opens doors. Faithfulness creates opportunities. Wisdom attracts resources. When you're known as someone of character, people seek you out. They want you on their team. They trust you with responsibility. They recommend you. They invest in you. Character, over time, creates a compound effect of opportunity. Fourth, character creates peace. When you're living with integrity, when your actions align with your values, when you don't have to keep track of lies or maintain false images or hide who you really are, there's an internal peace that comes with that. You can sleep at night. Your conscience is clear. You're not constantly anxious about being exposed or found out. There's a lightness that comes from living honestly. Fifth, character creates legacy. Long after circumstances change, long after your job title is forgotten and your bank account is irrelevant and your achievements fade from memory, your character, how you treated people, what you stood for, the kind of person you were, that endures. That's what people remember. That's what impacts the next generation. That's what creates lasting influence. So how do you build character? It's not a one-time decision or a dramatic moment. It's daily choices, small decisions that compound over time. It's choosing honesty in moments when lying would be easier. It's keeping commitments even when you don't feel like it. It's treating people with respect, even when they can't do anything for you. It's doing the right thing even when it costs you something. It's staying faithful in small things. It's practicing self-control in private moments. It's accepting responsibility instead of making excuses. It's choosing long-term good over short-term comfort. Character is built in the unsexy, unglamorous, daily grind of doing the next right thing. No one sees most of it. There's rarely immediate payoff. It's the consistent, repeated choice to live according to your values, even when circumstances would allow you to compromise. It's what you do when no one is watching, when there's no external accountability, when you could cut corners and no one would know. This is why crisis reveals character rather than creating it. The stress of crisis doesn't build character, it exposes what's already there. If you've been building character in the good times, through the small daily choices, it will be there to sustain you in the hard times. If you've been cutting corners and compromising and living for convenience, crisis will reveal that lack. When everything changes overnight, invest in character. Not just because it's the right thing to do, though it is, but because it's the wise thing to do, because character creates the kind of stability that can't be shaken by circumstances, because who you are matters more than what you have, or what you've achieved, or how things are going for you at any given moment. Build your life on character. Invest in becoming a person of integrity, wisdom, faithfulness, courage, compassion, humility. These qualities are your true foundation. They're what will hold when everything else is shaking. They're what will sustain you through any crisis. They're what will create opportunities even in the midst of loss. They're what will give you peace even in chaos. They're what will make you someone others can rely on. They're what will create a legacy that outlasts your life. Your circumstances will change multiple times, probably in ways you can't predict or control, but your character, that's yours. That's the one thing you have complete agency over. That's the one investment that can never be taken from you. That's your true stability in an uncertain world. Lesson 5. Anxiety is a choice. You can refuse. Proverbs tells us that anxiety weighs down the heart, but a kind word cheers it up. Anxiety in the heart of man causes depression, but a good word makes it glad. When everything changes overnight, anxiety feels inevitable, like a natural and unavoidable response to uncertainty. Your mind races through scenarios, most of them catastrophic. Your chest tightens, your breathing becomes shallow. Sleep becomes elusive, replaced by hours of staring at the ceiling playing out worst-case scenarios. You replay conversations, decisions, moments, looking for what you could have done differently. You imagine disasters that haven't happened yet and might never happen. You feel your body responding to threats that exist only in your mind. Elevated heart rate, tense muscles, that sick feeling in your stomach that won't go away. It feels completely out of your control, like anxiety is something that happens to you, something you're subject to, an inevitable result of difficult circumstances. But here's what Proverbs suggests, what modern psychology confirms, what people who've learned to manage anxiety know. Anxiety, while common and understandable, isn't something you have to surrender to. It's something you can resist, something you can counter, something you have more agency over than you might think. This doesn't mean you won't feel anxious. Anxiety is a normal human response to threat or uncertainty. Your body's stress response system is designed to activate when you perceive danger. That's healthy and adaptive. The problem comes when that system stays activated chronically, when you're living in a constant state of fight or flight, when anxiety stops being a brief response to immediate threat and becomes a permanent condition. So what does it look like to refuse to let anxiety rule you? First, it means recognizing that anxiety is often about imagined futures rather than present reality. Most of what you're anxious about hasn't happened yet and might never happen. You're suffering in advance for difficulties that may never come. Mark Twain supposedly said, "I've had a lot of worries in my life, most of which never happened." This is universally true. We torture ourselves with anxious thoughts about possibilities and probabilities and what-ifs, none of which are actually happening in this present moment. When you notice anxiety rising, bring yourself back to the present. What is actually happening right now in this moment? Not what might happen tomorrow or next week or next year. What is happening right now? Often you'll find that right now, in this actual moment, you're okay, you're breathing, you're safe. The catastrophe your mind is fixated on hasn't actually occurred. This doesn't mean you ignore real threats or don't plan for the future. It means you don't let imagined futures steal the peace of your present moments. Second, refusing anxiety means actively countering anxious thoughts with truth. Anxiety is often fueled by cognitive distortions, catastrophizing, all-or-nothing thinking, overgeneralizing, assuming the worst. Your mind tells you, this is a complete disaster, when it's actually a setback. It tells you everything is ruined when actually some things are hard, but others are okay. It tells you, I'll never recover from this, when you have no evidence that's true. These thought patterns feel true when you're anxious, but they're not truth. They're fear talking. Learn to recognize these patterns and talk back to them. When your mind says everything is falling apart, ask yourself, is that literally true? What evidence do I have for that? What evidence contradicts it? When anxiety says, I can't handle this, remind yourself of other hard things you've handled. When fear says, this will never get better, challenge that with, I don't know what the future holds, but I don't have evidence it will be as catastrophic as I'm imagining. This isn't toxic positivity or pretending things are fine. It's reality testing your anxious thoughts, refusing to let fear write the narrative unchallenged. You can acknowledge difficulty, this is really hard and I'm struggling, while also refusing catastrophizing. And I've handled hard things before, and I'll find a way through this too. Third, refusing anxiety means taking action on what you can control. Anxiety often increases when we feel helpless, when we're fixated on all the things we can't control. The antidote is to identify what you can control and take action there, even small action. You can't control the economy, but you can control your response to financial pressure. You can't control someone else's choices, but you can control your own. You can't control what's already happened, but you can control what you do next. Action is medicine for anxiety. Even imperfect action, even small steps, even just making a list of next steps or reaching out to one person for help or tackling one small task related to your situation. Movement creates momentum. It shifts you from passive victim to active agent. It reminds you that you do have some power, some control, some capacity to influence your situation. Fourth, refusing anxiety means managing your body, not just your mind. Anxiety isn't just mental, it's physiological. Your body's stress response affects your thinking, and your thinking affects your body's stress response. You can intervene at either level. Deep breathing, regular exercise, adequate sleep, limiting caffeine and alcohol, time in nature, physical touch with people you trust. These aren't luxuries or optional nice-to-haves. They're essential tools for regulating your nervous system and reducing anxiety. When you notice anxiety symptoms in your body, tight chest, racing heart, shallow breathing, you can shift your physiological state. Slow, deep breathing activates your parasympathetic nervous system, literally sending signals to your brain that you're safe. Progressive muscle relaxation does the same. Movement helps process stress hormones. These physical interventions can shift your mental state more effectively than trying to think your way out of anxiety. Fifth, refusing anxiety means connecting with others. Anxiety isolates. It tells you to withdraw, to hide, to deal with this alone. But connection is one of the most powerful antidotes to anxiety. Talking about what you're feeling with someone who understands, who can listen without judgment, who can offer perspective, this can shift anxiety dramatically. Being in the physical presence of people you trust, even if you're not talking about your situation, can calm your nervous system. Refuse the isolation that anxiety pushes you toward. Reach out, let people in, share what you're carrying. You don't have to carry it alone, and the weight is lighter when shared. Sixth, refusing anxiety means practicing gratitude intentionally. This sounds trite when you're in real difficulty, but the research on this is overwhelming. Intentional gratitude practice reduces anxiety. This doesn't mean pretending everything is wonderful. It means training your brain to notice what is good alongside what is hard. It's the practice of saying, "Today was really difficult, and I'm grateful for this one small good thing. My situation is overwhelming, and I'm thankful for this person who showed up for me. I'm scared about the future, and I'm grateful for the resources I do have in this moment." Gratitude doesn't erase difficulty, but it provides ballast. It reminds you that your life isn't only the hard thing, even when the hard thing is consuming most of your mental energy. It trains your attention to see a fuller picture of reality, not just the parts your anxious mind is fixated on. Seventh, refusing anxiety means limiting your consumption of anxiety-producing content. In our current moment, it's easy to spend hours consuming news, social media, content that amplifies fear and worst-case scenarios. This matters more than you think. What you feed your mind shapes your mental state. If you're constantly consuming anxiety-producing content, if your media diet is all doom and catastrophe and worst-case scenarios, your baseline anxiety will be higher. Be intentional about what you're consuming. Limit news to what you actually need to know. Curate your social media carefully. Choose content that informs without terrorizing, that helps without overwhelming. Your mental diet matters as much as your physical diet. Eighth, refusing anxiety means developing practices that create calm. Prayer, meditation, time in silence, being in nature, creative expression, music, reading, whatever practices create calm and groundedness for you. These aren't optional extras when you're anxious. They're essential. Build them into your daily routine. Protect them. Prioritize them. They're creating physiological and psychological conditions that make it harder for anxiety to take root. Ninth, refusing anxiety sometimes means getting professional help. If anxiety is overwhelming, if it's interfering with your ability to function, if self-help strategies aren't sufficient, there's no shame in seeking help from a therapist or counselor or doctor. Sometimes anxiety is rooted in trauma or brain chemistry or patterns that need professional intervention. Getting help is wisdom, not weakness. Finally, refusing anxiety means remembering that it's a feeling, not a fact. Anxiety feels true. It feels like accurate perception of reality, but feelings aren't facts. You can feel anxious and recognize that the feeling doesn't necessarily reflect reality accurately. You can notice, "I'm feeling anxious right now," without concluding, "Therefore everything is as terrible as it feels." There's distance between the feeling and the reality, and learning to maintain that distance is crucial. When everything is changing and uncertainty is high, anxiety will come. That's normal, that's human, but you don't have to let it rule you. You don't have to live at its mercy. You can resist it. You can counter it. You can choose practices and patterns and thoughts that reduce its power over you. Anxiety might be present, but you can refuse to let it write the script of your life. You have more agency than it feels like you do. Use it. Lesson 6. Laziness in a crisis is self-sabotage. When everything falls apart, when your world is turned upside down, there are typically two extreme responses that people gravitate toward. Some people go into overdrive, into frantic activity mode, trying to control everything, fix everything, manage every detail, work every angle. They can't sit still. They can't rest. They're consumed with doing something, anything, all the time. This can be just as destructive as the other extreme, which is shutting down completely. The shutdown response is what Proverbs addresses when it talks about laziness. Now, we need to be clear about what we're talking about here, because there's an important distinction between clinical depression, which is a real illness that makes normal functioning difficult and requires treatment, and simple avoidance or passivity that comes from fear or discouragement. Depression is a medical condition. Laziness is a choice, even if it doesn't always feel like one. Proverbs speaks to the lazy person, the one who sees what needs to be done but doesn't do it, who knows they should act but chooses passivity instead, who lets fear or discomfort or difficulty paralyze them into inaction. The sluggard buries his hand in the dish. He will not even bring it back to his mouth. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep? In times of crisis, this shutdown response is understandable. Everything feels overwhelming. The task of rebuilding or recovering or navigating this new reality feels impossible. You don't know where to start. You don't have energy. You don't see how your actions could possibly make a difference. So you do nothing. You stay in bed. You binge shows. You scroll social media. You engage in passive consumption and avoidance. You know you should be doing something about your situation, but the gap between where you are and where you need to be feels too large to bridge, so you don't even try. This is self-sabotage. Because here's what happens with inaction. The problem gets worse. The crisis deepens. The hole gets deeper. The gap between where you are and where you need to be grows. Whatever action might have helped if you'd taken it early becomes less effective or impossible later. Passivity in crisis almost never leads to things resolving on their own. It leads to compounding problems. Think about it practically. If you've lost your job and you need income, every day you don't apply for jobs, don't network, don't explore options is a day you're further behind financially. If your relationship is struggling and needs attention, every day you avoid the hard conversations is a day the problem gets worse. If your health is failing and needs changes, every day you don't take action is a day your body is more compromised. Passivity has consequences, and in crisis, those consequences compound quickly. But here's what's insidious about the laziness trap. It's often powered by a lie that says, I need to know exactly what to do before I do anything. So you wait for clarity, for a perfect plan, for certainty about the right path forward. And while you're waiting for perfect clarity, you do nothing. But clarity often comes from action, not before it. You learn by doing. You gain information by moving. You create momentum that leads to more momentum. Proverbs presents an alternative to both frantic overactivity and passive inaction, wise, intentional action. This isn't about doing everything or having a perfect plan. It's about doing the next right thing. It's about taking whatever step is in front of you, even if you can't see the whole staircase. It's about movement, even imperfect movement, because movement creates possibility that inaction never will. What does this look like practically? It means identifying one thing you can do today that moves you in the right direction and doing that thing. Not everything, not solving the whole problem, Just one thing. Apply for one job. Have one hard conversation. Make one phone call. Take one walk. Clean one room. Write one paragraph. Pay one bill. Take one step. This might seem insignificant when you're facing a mountain of problems. But here's what small steps do. They break the paralysis. They shift you from passive to active. They create evidence that you can take action, which makes the next action easier. They generate momentum. They produce small wins that build confidence. They move you, even incrementally, toward where you need to be. Proverbs uses the metaphor of the ant to talk about this. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. The ant doesn't tackle everything at once. It carries one grain at a time, but it's consistent. It keeps working. It doesn't wait for perfect conditions or complete clarity. It does what it can with what it has, where it is. And over time, those small, consistent efforts build something significant. This is the antidote to crisis-induced laziness, consistent, small action. Not heroic efforts, not having it all figured out, not doing everything perfectly, just steady, persistent movement in the right direction, showing up, doing what you can, taking the next step. And here's what's powerful about this approach. It works even when you don't feel like it. You don't need motivation to take one small step. You don't need perfect clarity to do the next right thing. You don't need to feel inspired to take action. You just need to decide to move and then move, regardless of how you feel. In fact, often the feeling follows the action rather than preceding it. You don't feel motivated, so you don't act. But if you act first, motivation often shows up during the process. You don't feel like exercising, but once you start moving, you often feel better. You don't feel like tackling that difficult task, but once you begin, momentum builds. Action creates energy. Inaction depletes it. The lazy person waits to feel like acting. The wise person acts regardless of feeling, knowing that action itself often generates the feeling they're waiting for. This is crucial in crisis, when your feelings are likely telling you to shut down, to give up, to stop trying. If you wait until you feel like taking action, you might wait forever. But if you take action despite your feelings, you create the possibility of those feelings shifting. Proverbs also warns about the consequences of laziness that extend beyond just practical problems. Laziness affects character. It creates patterns. It shapes who you're becoming. The lazy person doesn't just have a messy house or financial problems. They become someone who avoids difficulty, who takes the easy path, who can't be counted on, who doesn't follow through. And once that's your character, it affects everything. In contrast, the person who takes consistent action even when it's hard is building character. They're becoming someone reliable, someone who follows through, someone who can be trusted, someone who does hard things. This character development matters more than the specific problem you're facing right now, because character goes with you into every future season. The person you're becoming through how you respond to this crisis will determine how you face the next one. So refuse to let crisis paralyze you into inaction. Yes, feel your feelings. Yes, acknowledge that this is hard and overwhelming and you don't have all the answers. But then take action anyway. Do something. Do anything that moves you forward. Take one small step and then another and another. Don't let laziness masquerade as self-care or rest. Sometimes you do need rest. Sometimes stepping back is wise. But there's a difference between strategic rest that restores you for action and avoidance that lets problems compound. Be honest with yourself about which one you're engaged in. And don't let overwhelm become an excuse for inaction. When everything feels too big, break it down. What's one small thing you can do? Do that. And then ask the question again. What's one small thing I can do now? The path forward is almost never taking one giant leap. It's usually taking many small steps consistently over time. Remember, in crisis, action is medicine. Movement creates possibility. Inaction creates stagnation. You might not be able to control all your circumstances, but you can control whether you act or not. Choose action, choose movement. Choose to do what you can with what you have where you are. It matters more than you think. I need to pause here and continue with the remaining lessons in my next response to ensure we reach the full 120,000 character count you've requested. Lesson 7. Your temper will cost you everything. When stress is high and everything feels uncertain, when the future is unclear and the present is overwhelming, emotions run hot. You're operating on less sleep than you need. You're carrying more worry than you can bear. You're dealing with more pressure than feels manageable. Your nervous system is in a constant state of activation. Your reserves are depleted. Your patience is thin. And in this state, small things that normally wouldn't bother you suddenly feel like major offenses. Someone says something thoughtless and you snap. A minor inconvenience becomes the final straw. A simple question from someone who loves you feels like an attack, and you lash out. Proverbs has extensive warnings about the hot-tempered person, about the fool who gives full vent to their anger, about the one who is quick to quarrel. A hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end. A hot-tempered person commits many sins. Better to be patient than powerful. Better to have self-control than to conquer a city. These aren't just moral pronouncements about anger being wrong. They're observations about consequences. Your temper, left unchecked, will damage the very relationships you most need to sustain you through crisis. Think about what happens in a moment of anger. You say something cutting to your spouse, something you know will hurt, something designed to wound. You snap at your child who is just trying to help or asking an innocent question. You lash out at a friend who reached out with genuine concern. You send an angry email or text that you can't take back. You burn a bridge with someone who could have been an ally. In that moment, the anger feels justified. They deserved it. They should have known better. They were wrong. You were right to put them in their place. But then the moment passes. The anger cools. And you're left with the wreckage. A hurt spouse, a confused or wounded child, a friend who pulls back, a professional relationship damaged, words that can't be unsaid, wounds that will take time to heal if they heal at all. The cost of unchecked anger compounds over time. One outburst might be forgiven, but pattern after pattern of losing your temper creates lasting damage. People start walking on eggshells around you. They stop being honest with you because they're afraid of your reaction. They pull away emotionally to protect themselves. Children learn that you're not safe when you're stressed. Spouses lose trust that you can handle difficulty without becoming explosive. Colleagues and friends decide you're too volatile to rely on. And here's what's tragic. The people who pay the highest price for your lack of self-control are usually the people who have nothing to do with why you're angry in the first place. You're stressed about finances, but you snap at your kid. You're anxious about the future, but you lash out at your spouse. You're overwhelmed by circumstances, but you take it out on people who are actually trying to help you. They become collateral damage in your inability to manage your emotions. Proverbs identifies this as foolishness, and rightly so. Because what could be more foolish than damaging your most important relationships? The very relationships that could sustain you through crisis, because you can't control your temper. What could be more self-destructive than pushing away the people who love you because you're taking out your stress on them? So what's the alternative? First, recognize that feeling angry isn't the problem. Anger is an emotion, and emotions aren't inherently right or wrong. They're information. Anger often signals that something feels unjust or wrong or threatening. The emotion itself isn't the issue. The issue is what you do with it. Do you use it destructively or constructively? Do you let it control you or do you control it? Second, create space between feeling angry and acting on anger. This is crucial. The angry impulse says, respond immediately, let them have it, express exactly what you're feeling right now. Wisdom says, wait, pause. Create distance between the feeling and the action. Count to 10. Take 3 deep breaths. Walk away for a few minutes. Sleep on it before responding to that email. Whatever it takes to create even a small gap between the feeling and the response. In that gap, several things can happen. The intensity of the emotion usually diminishes. You gain perspective. You can think more clearly about whether responding now is actually wise. You can consider consequences. You can choose a response that's more measured, more thoughtful, more likely to actually accomplish what you want, rather than just venting your emotions. Third, examine what's really fueling your anger. In crisis, anger is often a secondary emotion covering over fear, hurt, helplessness, or shame. You're scared about the future, and it comes out as anger at people around you. You're feeling helpless about your situation, and it manifests as rage at small inconveniences. You're hurt by something that happened and you lash out. Understanding what's underneath the anger helps you address the real issue rather than just reacting to the surface emotion. Fourth, develop practices that help you process anger in healthy ways. Physical exercise can help metabolize stress hormones. Journaling can help you process what you're feeling without dumping it on others. Talking with a trusted friend or counselor can help you work through anger in a safe space. Prayer or meditation can help you release what you're carrying. Find constructive outlets for the emotional energy rather than destructive ones. Fifth, learn to communicate about difficult things without anger. You can be honest about how you feel. You can address problems. You can set boundaries. You can speak truth, all without rage. In fact, you'll be far more effective when you can do these things calmly than when you do them in anger. Anger makes people defensive. It escalates conflict. It shuts down productive conversation. Calm, clear communication about difficult things is far more likely to actually resolve issues. Sixth, apologize quickly and genuinely when you do lose your temper. You will mess this up sometimes. You'll say things you shouldn't. You'll react poorly. When that happens, own it. Don't make excuses. Don't blame the other person for provoking you. Take responsibility. Apologize sincerely. Commit to doing better, and then actually work on doing better. Seventh, recognize that repeated loss of temper might indicate you need help. If you find yourself constantly angry, if you're regularly explosive, if you can't seem to control your reactions even when you want to, that might point to deeper issues. Unresolved trauma, clinical depression or anxiety, patterns learned in childhood that need professional help to change. There's no shame in getting that help. In fact, getting help is taking responsibility for your patterns instead of continuing to damage people around you. Eighth, remember that self-control in the face of anger is actually a form of strength, not weakness. Our culture sometimes glorifies anger, treats emotional explosiveness as authenticity or passion. But Proverbs presents self-control as greater than power. It takes real strength to feel intense anger and choose not to act on it destructively. It takes character to be furious and still respond with wisdom. That's not weakness or inauthenticity, that's maturity. In seasons of crisis when stress is highest and patience is thinnest, guard your temper with special care. The stakes are too high. The relationships you need are too valuable. The potential for lasting damage is too great. Yes, this is hard. Yes, you're under tremendous pressure. Yes, you're dealing with more than feels fair or manageable. But none of that justifies damaging the people around you with unchecked anger. Your temper, if you don't control it, will cost you. It will cost you relationships. It will cost you trust. It will cost you influence. It will cost you peace. It will cost you opportunities. It will cost you the support you desperately need. Don't let momentary emotional release create lasting relational damage. The momentary satisfaction of venting your anger is never worth the long-term cost. Lesson 8. Planning is wise, but flexibility is wiser. Proverbs highly values planning, preparation, and forethought. The plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty. Make plans by seeking advice. If you wage war, obtain guidance. By wisdom a house is built, and through understanding it is established. The wise person looks ahead, considers consequences, seeks counsel, makes thoughtful plans rather than just reacting impulsively or hoping things work out. But Proverbs also recognizes something crucial. Circumstances change. Plans get disrupted. The future you envisioned doesn't materialize. And rigid attachment to plans that no longer fit reality is just as foolish as having no plans at all. In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. There's a tension here between the importance of planning and the necessity of holding plans loosely, between being intentional about the future and remaining flexible when that future doesn't unfold as expected. When everything changes overnight, your original plan, the future you were building toward, the steps you had mapped out, the trajectory you were on, often becomes obsolete. Maybe you had a career plan that required staying in a location that's no longer viable. Maybe you had financial plans that assumed income that's disappeared. Maybe you had relationship plans that assumed a partnership that's ended. Maybe you had health plans that assumed a body that's no longer functioning as it was. The plan you had doesn't work anymore. The future you were aiming at is no longer possible, at least not in the way you imagined. This is disorienting and grief-inducing. You invested in that plan. You built toward that future. You made decisions based on assumptions that turned out to be false. And now all that planning feels wasted, and you're back to square one trying to figure out what to do next. The temptation is either to cling desperately to the original plan, trying to force it to work even when circumstances have made it untenable, or to swing to the opposite extreme and give up on planning altogether, deciding that planning is pointless since everything changes anyway. Both responses are unwise. Clinging to plans that no longer fit reality is like using an outdated map. You'll end up lost, no matter how carefully you follow it. But abandoning planning altogether leaves you drifting, reactive, at the mercy of circumstances rather than shaping them where you can. The wise approach is what we might call adaptive planning, being intentional and thoughtful about the future while remaining flexible enough to adjust when circumstances change. You plan, but you hold your plans with open hands. You commit to direction, but not to rigidity. You think ahead while staying responsive to present reality. What does this look like practically? It means distinguishing between principles and plans. Principles are the values and priorities that guide you. These remain constant even when circumstances change. Plans are the specific strategies for living out those principles in particular circumstances. These need to adapt when circumstances shift. For example, your principle might be, I want to steward my resources wisely. The plan for how you do that might need to change dramatically if your financial situation changes. The principle stays constant. The plan adapts. Adaptive planning also means building in contingencies. When you make plans, ask yourself, what if this doesn't work out as expected? What if this assumption turns out to be false? What are alternative paths? What's plan B? This isn't pessimism, it's wisdom. It's recognizing that you don't control all variables and that preparing for multiple scenarios is smarter than betting everything on one outcome. It means staying in learning mode. When plans don't work out, ask why. What did I miss? What assumptions were wrong? What can I learn from this? Each failed plan or necessary pivot is data that can inform better planning going forward. The person who learns from changed circumstances gets wiser. The person who just gets bitter gets stuck. It means being willing to let go of sunk costs. You invested time, money, energy into a particular path. That path is no longer viable. The temptation is to keep pouring resources into it because you've already invested so much. But wise flexibility means being able to say that investment is gone, and continuing to invest in something that's not working will just increase my losses. Cut your losses. Pivot. Don't let past investment trap you in future foolishness. It means maintaining perspective about what you can and can't control. You can control your effort, your decisions, your responses, your character. You can't control economic conditions, other people's choices, natural disasters, pandemics, or countless other factors that affect outcomes. Plan around what you can control. Stay flexible about what you can't. Adaptive planning also requires humility. The ability to admit when you were wrong, when your plan wasn't as solid as you thought, when you need to change course. Pride keeps you locked into plans that aren't working because admitting the plan failed feels like admitting you failed. Humility allows you to separate your identity from your plans and say, that plan didn't work, so I'm making a new one, without it being a referendum on your worth or competence. It means staying connected to wise counsel. When you're deep in your own situation, you can lose perspective. Trusted advisors can see what you're missing, can spot when you're clinging to plans that need to change, can suggest alternatives you haven't considered. Regular check-ins with people whose judgment you trust helps keep your planning grounded in reality, rather than wishful thinking or rigid attachment to what was. Here's what's paradoxical about flexibility. It actually requires more planning, not less. The person who plans rigidly only needs one plan. The person who plans flexibly needs to think through multiple scenarios, consider various contingencies, maintain awareness of changing conditions, regularly reassess and adjust. It's more work, not less. But it's also more realistic and more likely to actually succeed. Think of it like navigation. If you're sailing, you have a destination in mind. That's your plan. But you don't just set a course and assume you'll arrive without adjustment. You constantly monitor conditions, wind, weather, currents. You adjust your sails. You might need to tack, moving at angles rather than straight toward your destination. You might need to wait out a storm or take advantage of favorable winds. You might even need to redirect to a different port if your original destination becomes unreachable. But you're always navigating actively, not just hoping your initial plan works out. This is how to approach planning in times of change. Know where you want to go, your values, your priorities, the kind of life you want to build. But stay responsive to conditions. Adjust your approach as needed. Don't mistake changing tactics for abandoning purpose. You can remain committed to your destination while being completely flexible about the route. When everything has changed and your original plan is obsolete, don't despair and don't get rigid. Make a new plan. Take what you've learned. Account for the new reality. Seek counsel. Consider options. Choose a direction. Take action, and remain willing to adjust again when needed. This iterative process, plan, act, assess, adjust, repeat, is how you navigate uncertainty effectively. The goal isn't to have a plan that never changes. The goal is to be someone who plans thoughtfully and adapts wisely, who maintains direction while remaining flexible about path, who learns from changing circumstances rather than being broken by them. That's the wisdom Proverbs points toward: intentionality combined with adaptability, commitment to purpose combined with flexibility about method. Lesson 9. Greed will destroy you from the inside out. Crisis often creates or intensifies financial pressure, and financial pressure has a way of activating some of our most destructive impulses. When resources feel scarce, when the future feels uncertain, when you're worried about survival or security or stability, the temptation toward greed becomes powerful. Greed isn't just wanting financial security. That's reasonable. Greed is the excessive, insatiable desire for more that's willing to compromise ethics, damage relationships, or sacrifice values in pursuit of wealth or material gain. Proverbs speaks extensively about greed and consistently warns of its destructive consequences. The greedy bring ruin to their households, but the one who hates bribes will live. The greedy stir up conflict, but those who trust in the Lord will prosper. A greedy person tries to get rich quick, but doesn't realize they're headed for poverty. Whoever is greedy for unjust gain troubles their own household. Notice that these warnings aren't primarily about what greed does to others, though that matters. They're about what greed does to you, to your household, to your life. Greed is self-destructive. It ruins you from the inside out. It corrupts your judgment, damages your relationships, distorts your values, and ironically, often leads to the very poverty it's trying to escape. How does this work? First, greed corrupts judgment. When you're motivated by greed, you make decisions based on potential financial gain rather than what's wise or right or sustainable. You take shortcuts that create long-term problems. You pursue opportunities that look lucrative but are actually scams or barely legal schemes. You compromise your ethics for profit, thinking you can get away with it or that it's justified by your financial need. These decisions, driven by greed rather than wisdom, consistently lead to worse outcomes than if you'd made decisions based on integrity and sound judgment. Second, greed damages relationships. The greedy person treats others as means to financial ends rather than as human beings with inherent worth. They use people. They manipulate. They take advantage. They prioritize profit over people, and this destroys trust, ruins friendships, alienates family, and leaves the greedy person increasingly isolated. The very relationships that could provide real security and support are sacrificed in pursuit of financial gain that never quite satisfies. Third, greed distorts values. It makes you worship money, whether you'd articulate it that way or not. Money becomes the measure of worth, the source of security, the primary good you're pursuing. Everything else, character, relationships, integrity, meaning, purpose, becomes secondary to accumulation. And this creates a hollowness, a sense of meaninglessness even when you have money, because you've oriented your whole life around something that can't actually satisfy the deepest human needs. Fourth, greed creates a treadmill you can never get off. There's never enough. No matter how much you accumulate, the greedy person always wants more. The goalpost keeps moving. You think, if I just had X amount, I'd feel secure. But then you reach that amount and immediately the number changes. This is why Proverbs says, the greedy are headed for poverty even as they pursue wealth, because they'll never feel wealthy, never feel satisfied, never feel like they have enough. They're in a state of perpetual scarcity, even in the midst of abundance. Fifth, greed makes you vulnerable to exploitation. Con artists, scammers, and manipulators know how to spot greedy people and know exactly how to exploit that greed. Get-rich-quick schemes, too-good-to-be-true opportunities, high-pressure sales tactics. These work on greedy people because greed overrides discernment. The promise of easy money or massive returns short-circuits critical thinking. And the greedy person, thinking they're being clever, gets taken advantage of, losing the resources they were so desperate to accumulate. Sixth, greed creates internal corruption that affects everything else. When you're willing to compromise ethics for money, that compromise doesn't stay neatly contained in the financial realm. Character isn't compartmentalized. The person who'll lie in business will eventually lie in relationships. The person who'll cheat for profit will cheat in other areas. Greed creates a pattern of compromise that metastasizes. In times of crisis, when financial pressure is real and intense, guarding against greed becomes crucial. This doesn't mean you shouldn't pursue financial stability or work to improve your economic situation. It means you need to watch your heart, your motivations, your methods. Are you pursuing financial health through wise, ethical means? Or are you being driven by greed that's willing to cut corners, compromise values, or sacrifice what truly matters? Here are some warning signs of greed creeping in. You're constantly comparing your financial situation to others and feeling envious or inadequate. You're making decisions primarily based on financial gain without considering other factors like integrity, relationships, or alignment with values. You're unwilling to be generous because you're in scarcity mode. You're considering opportunities that feel ethically questionable but financially attractive. You're prioritizing work and money accumulation over relationships and self-care. You're never satisfied with what you have, always focused on what you don't have. You're willing to lie, manipulate, or take advantage of others for financial gain. If you recognize these patterns, stop and recalibrate. Remember that real security doesn't come from accumulation. It comes from wisdom, character, relationships, and appropriate trust. Remember that how you get money matters as much as whether you get it. Remember that sacrificing integrity for profit always costs more than it gains. Remember that relationships and character are more valuable than any amount of money. The alternative to greed isn't poverty or lack of ambition. It's contentment combined with diligent work. It's pursuing financial stability through ethical means. It's being generous even when resources are limited. It's trusting that living with integrity will ultimately lead to better outcomes than living with greed, even if integrity costs you opportunities that greed would have taken. Proverbs consistently contrasts the greedy person with the generous person. The generous person prospers. They have enough and share. Their relationships thrive. They sleep peacefully. They have clear consciences. They build lives of meaning and impact. The greedy person, no matter how much they accumulate, never has peace, never has enough, never has the satisfaction they're seeking. When financial pressure is intense, fight greed by practicing generosity. Even small generosity. Give something away, help someone, share what you have. This breaks the power of scarcity thinking and reminds you that you're not defined by what you accumulate. It also creates the kind of relational capital and goodwill that often comes back to help you when you need it. Fight greed by being grateful for what you have. Gratitude is greed's antidote. When you regularly acknowledge and appreciate the resources you do have, however limited, it changes your relationship with money and possessions. You move from scarcity to sufficiency, from I don't have enough to I have what I need for today. Fight greed by defining enough. What is actually enough for you? What do you actually need as opposed to what you want? Getting clear on this helps you discern between wise financial planning and greed. It gives you a target that's based on actual needs and reasonable security rather than an endless treadmill of more. Fight greed by examining your motivations. Before making financial decisions, ask yourself, why am I pursuing this? What's driving this choice? Am I making this decision from fear or greed or wisdom? What would I do if money weren't a factor? This self-examination helps you catch greed before it leads to destructive choices. Remember, in crisis, when financial pressure is real, the temptation toward greed is understandable. But giving in to that temptation will make everything worse. It will corrupt your judgment, damage your relationships, distort your values, and leave you perpetually unsatisfied even if you accumulate wealth. Guard your heart against greed. Pursue financial stability through wise, ethical means. Practice contentment and generosity. Build your life on character rather than accumulation. The peace and security that come from this approach are far more valuable than anything greed could ever deliver. Lesson 10. Faithfulness in small things builds capacity for big things. When your life has been turned upside down, when you're dealing with crisis or massive change, it's natural to think that only big, dramatic actions matter. You need a breakthrough. You need a major opportunity. You need something significant to shift. The daily mundane tasks feel irrelevant or pointless in the face of the larger challenges you're facing. Why bother making your bed when your whole life is in chaos? Why worry about keeping commitments when everything else is falling apart? Why maintain small disciplines when you're barely surviving? But Proverbs teaches something different, something counterintuitive but profoundly true. Faithfulness in small things builds capacity for bigger things. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. Do you see a person skilled in their work? They will serve before kings. They will not serve before officials of low rank. The person who's faithful in small, unsexy, unglamorous tasks is being formed in ways that create capacity for greater responsibility and opportunity. This isn't just about external reward or opportunity, though that's part of it. It's about internal formation. Character is built in the small moments. Integrity is formed in the private choices that no one sees. Discipline is developed through consistency in little things, and when opportunity does come, when a door opens for something bigger, the person who's been faithful in small things is ready for it. They have the character, the capacity, the patterns that enable them to steward larger responsibility well. Think about how this works practically. The person who's faithful to show up on time for a low-level job is forming a habit of reliability that will serve them throughout their career. The person who does excellent work, even when no one's watching, is building a standard of quality that will distinguish them when people are watching. The person who keeps their word in small commitments is creating a reputation for trustworthiness that opens doors later. The person who manages a small budget carefully is developing the skills and discipline that would enable them to manage a larger one. Conversely, the person who's sloppy or unreliable or half-hearted in small things rarely steps up when bigger things come along. They haven't built the capacity. They haven't formed the character. They haven't developed the habits. They think they'll rise to the occasion when it matters, but character doesn't work that way. How you do anything tends to be how you do everything. The patterns you establish in small things are the patterns that will show up in big things. In times of crisis, this principle becomes especially important because crisis often requires you to start over or start small. Maybe you've lost a prestigious position and have to take something more humble. Maybe you've lost financial resources and have to rebuild from a smaller base. Maybe you've lost relationships and have to start with 1 or 2 new connections. Maybe you've lost health and have to celebrate small improvements. The temptation is to resent the smallness, to feel like it's beneath you, to half-heartedly engage because it's not what you think you deserve or what you're capable of. But this is precisely when faithfulness in small things matters most. How you handle the small beginning will determine whether you build from it or stay stuck in resentment. The person who faithfully does excellent work in a humble position will likely not stay in that position long. Their faithfulness creates opportunities. The person who carefully stewards small resources will likely see those resources grow. Their faithfulness attracts more. The person who invests deeply in 1 or 2 relationships will likely see those relationships multiply. Their faithfulness draws others. This is why Proverbs speaks so highly of diligence and skill and thoroughness in work. It's not about being a workaholic or finding your identity in productivity. It's about recognizing that how you approach even mundane tasks is forming who you're becoming. Are you developing the kind of character that can be trusted with more? Or are you being sloppy, cutting corners, doing just enough to get by? When everything has changed and you're starting over in some way, embrace the small beginning. Don't despise it. Don't resent it. See it as an opportunity to build a foundation that will support whatever comes next. Be faithful in the small things that are in front of you right now. Show up fully. Do excellent work. Keep your commitments. Be reliable. Maintain your standards. Not because anyone's watching or because you'll be immediately rewarded, but because you're building something inside yourself that will serve you for the rest of your life. This also applies to personal disciplines and habits. When your life is chaotic, it's easy to let everything slide. You stop exercising because you're stressed. You stop reading or learning because you're overwhelmed. You stop maintaining healthy rhythms because everything's upside down anyway. But maintaining small disciplines in hard seasons is actually when they matter most. These are the practices that create stability, that maintain your health, that keep you growing, that provide structure when everything else is chaos. The person who keeps exercising through crisis, even if it's just a short walk each day, is maintaining physical and mental health that will enable them to navigate difficulty better. The person who maintains a practice of reading or learning is continuing to grow even in hard times, ensuring they don't just survive, but emerge stronger. The person who keeps up spiritual practices or meaningful rituals is maintaining connection to what matters most, creating anchor points in the storm. These might seem like small things when you're dealing with big problems, but they're not small. They're the foundation. They're what keeps you functioning. They're what builds capacity. They're what forms character. And they're what positions you to handle whatever comes next. Here's another dimension of this principle. Faithfulness in small things often means attending to details that seem insignificant but actually matter, following through on small commitments, responding to messages, showing up when you said you would, being thorough in small tasks, maintaining standards in work that no one else might notice. These might seem trivial, but they create a pattern. They build trust. They form reputation. And reputation, built through consistent faithfulness in small things, opens doors that no amount of talent or ambition can open on its own. Think of it this way. You're always in training. Whether you realize it or not, how you're handling your current circumstances, even if they're small, even if they're not what you want, is training you for future opportunities. Are you learning? Are you growing? Are you building character? Are you developing skills? Are you forming habits of excellence and faithfulness? If so, you're preparing for something bigger. If not, you'll likely stay where you are or repeat similar patterns in new contexts. This isn't about earning God's favor or proving your worth. It's about the simple reality that character and capacity are built through consistent faithfulness over time. There are no shortcuts. You can't skip the formation process. You can't jump straight to the big opportunity without the character to sustain it. The big things you want to see happen in your life will require a version of you that doesn't exist yet. And that version is formed through faithfulness in the small things you're facing right now. So don't despise the small beginning. Don't resent the mundane tasks. Don't cut corners on the unglamorous work. Don't abandon the small disciplines. These are building something in you. They're forming character, developing capacity, creating patterns, establishing reputation, building a foundation. Be faithful in them, excellent in them, consistent in them. And watch how that faithfulness creates opportunities you couldn't have manufactured through ambition or striving alone. The big things you're hoping for, they're more likely to come to the person who's been faithful in small things than to the person who's been waiting for big opportunities while neglecting what's in front of them. Be faithful where you are, with what you have, in what you're doing, today. That's how you build a future worth having. Lesson 11. Fear of others is a trap. When everything changes, when your life is suddenly different from what you planned or expected, you become acutely aware of what others think. People have opinions about your situation. They have judgments about your choices. They have perspectives on how you should be handling things. Family members weigh in. Friends offer unsolicited advice. Acquaintances ask probing questions. Strangers on social media have commentary. And in your vulnerable state, when you're already unsure and overwhelmed, all of this external input can become crushing. You worry about what people are thinking. Are they judging you? Do they see you as a failure? Are they talking about you? Do they think less of you now? You become hyper-aware of perception, of how you're being perceived, of what people must be saying when you're not around. You feel the weight of judgment, real or imagined. You fear criticism. You dread pity. You can't bear the thought of being seen as someone who couldn't make it work, who fell apart, who's struggling. Proverbs addresses this directly and unflinchingly. Fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. The fear of others, their opinions, their judgments, their approval or disapproval is a trap. It ensnares you, it limits you, it controls you. It keeps you from making wise decisions because you're too concerned with how those decisions will be perceived. It paralyzes you with worry about what people will think. It shapes your choices based on managing others' perceptions rather than doing what's actually right or wise or necessary. Think about how destructive this is. You're in crisis. You need to make difficult decisions. You need to take actions that might be unconventional or that might not make sense to others. You need to set boundaries or make changes or admit mistakes or ask for help or do any number of things that require courage and honesty. But fear of what others will think stops you. You make decisions designed to maintain their approval rather than to address your actual situation. You pretend everything's fine when it's not because you can't bear the thought of people knowing you're struggling. You stay in situations you should leave because you're afraid of judgment. You don't ask for help you desperately need because you don't want to appear weak or incapable. This fear-driven decision-making is what Proverbs calls a snare, a trap that catches you and holds you captive. You become enslaved to others' opinions, real or imagined. Your choices are controlled not by wisdom or values or what's best for you, but by what you think will maintain others' approval or avoid their criticism. And this is no way to live, especially in crisis when you most need freedom to make wise choices regardless of how they're perceived. Here's what's particularly insidious about fear of man. It's often based on projections and assumptions rather than reality. You imagine what people are thinking. You assume they're judging you. You interpret their questions or comments through a lens of criticism, but often you're wrong. Often people aren't thinking about you as much as you think they are. Often their questions come from concern, not judgment. Often their perceptions are more generous than you imagine, but fear creates a narrative in your mind that treats these imagined judgments as reality, and you respond to the narrative rather than to what's actually happening. Even when people are actually judging you, even when criticism is real, the question is, do their opinions have to control you? Do they get to determine your choices? Do you have to live in a way that's designed to please them or avoid their disapproval? The answer, according to Proverbs, is no. Their opinions, while they might sting, don't have authority over your life unless you give them that authority. So what's the alternative to fear of man? Proverbs points to trust in something larger, trust in God, in what's right, in your own sense of calling and purpose. When you're grounded in something beyond others' opinions, those opinions lose their power over you. Not because you become arrogant or dismissive, but because you have a more solid foundation for decision-making than the shifting sands of popular approval. This looks like making decisions based on values rather than perception. What's the right thing to do regardless of how it will be received? What does integrity require, even if people won't understand? What does your situation actually need, even if it's not what people expect? When your decision-making is rooted in values and wisdom rather than in managing others' opinions, you're free to act wisely even when it's not popular or understood. It means being willing to be misunderstood. Some people won't get it. They won't understand your choices. They'll judge or criticize or question, and that's okay. You don't need everyone to understand. You don't need universal approval. You need to do what's right and wise for your situation and trust that the people who matter will either understand or will give you the benefit of the doubt. It means setting boundaries around input. Not everyone gets to weigh in on your decisions. Not everyone's opinion deserves consideration. You can be polite without being porous. You can acknowledge people's input without being controlled by it. You can say thank you for your perspective without feeling obligated to follow it. You get to decide whose voices matter and whose don't. It means being honest about struggle rather than maintaining an image. Pretending everything's fine when it's not is exhausting and isolating. It's driven by fear of judgment. But honesty, this is hard, I'm struggling, I don't have it all together, often creates connection rather than judgment. It gives others permission to be honest too. It builds real relationships rather than superficial ones based on performance. It means accepting that you can't control what others think. You simply can't. You can't manage their perceptions. You can't make everyone see you the way you want to be seen. You can't prevent criticism or judgment or misunderstanding, so stop trying. Focus on being someone of character and integrity and let people think what they're going to think. Here's what's paradoxical. When you stop being controlled by fear of others' opinions, when you're free to make wise decisions regardless of perception, people often respect that more than when you're trying to please them. Authenticity and courage are attractive. People can sense when you're being genuine versus when you're performing. And even if they don't agree with your choices, they often respect someone who has the courage to live according to their convictions rather than according to popular opinion. Fear of man keeps you stuck. It keeps you in situations you should leave. It prevents you from making necessary changes. It stops you from being honest. It makes you perpetually anxious about perception. It robs you of freedom and peace. It makes you perform rather than live. And in crisis, when you need freedom to make wise, courageous choices, this fear is especially destructive. Break free from it. Yes, be wise about how you communicate with others. Yes, consider counsel from people you trust. Yes, be thoughtful about relationships and reputation. But don't be controlled by fear of judgment or disapproval. Don't make decisions designed to maintain approval. Don't sacrifice what's right or wise or necessary because you're afraid of criticism. Don't stay trapped in fear of what others might think. You're not called to live for an audience of critics. You're called to live with integrity, wisdom, and courage. Sometimes that will be popular. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes people will understand. Sometimes they won't. That's not your primary concern. Your primary concern is doing what's right and wise, regardless of how it's received. When you live from that place, you're free. And that freedom is worth far more than any amount of approval.